All right, we're recording. Let
You'll
me.
hear my dog in the background chewing on toys.
Okay, that's all right by me. Let me pull this up here. Any particular? Do you just want to do exam 1, exam 2, exam 3, or do you want to do it in a different order just in case you run out of time?
Exam 1's fine.
Okay. And you took it on time with everybody else, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That just helps me make sure I'm pulling up the correct form here. All right. Responses. Let's see. So, sorry for the delay. I'm still pulling it up.
Okay.
Sorry. Questions. Ooh. Ooh, here's a question too for you. I could go through all the questions and give you all the correct answers, or I could just go through the ones you missed and talk about those. It's up to you.
All the correct answers, please.
Okay, that'll be helpful for your classmates too.
Mhm.
And this is the first time I've done it this way, so let's hope this works. Let's see your entire screen. All right. Let's see. You should be able to see my screen right now, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here we go. Which of the following can perform all the functions of life? And the answer is cells. Cells can do all the functions. Organelles are parts of cells, so that's why it's not correct. Biological molecules are parts of organelles, so that's why it's not correct. An amino acid is a type of biological molecules. Smartphone, that's just a throwaway. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Your friend from high school is trying to get you to buy and sell her essential oils, so she's providing you with some articles about their usefulness. Which of the following indicates she might be sharing pseudoscience? So basically, from this list, what might be a red flag for pseudoscience? And the best option was that evidence is anecdotal, meaning it's not like from a peer-reviewed journal. Anecdotal evidence will be like, yeah, so ever since I've been using this essential oil, my hair's been really shiny, right? That's anecdotal evidence. That's just her saying so, or anybody else for that reason or matter. Anyway, that's the correct answer. If information was from a primary source, that's actually a good thing. That means it's probably not pseudoscience. If it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, again, it's probably not pseudoscience. Anyway, I guess we won't have time to go through all those. I'll try to keep this quick for you. The next one is, what is science? And the correct answer is the inquiry-based effort to describe and explain nature. Truth, that word is too subjective, and we talked about that a little bit in lecture. And also, we should behave ethically and morally, but the scientific process in itself does not include ethics and morals. Anyway, any questions about that?
No.
All right. Your smartphone won't turn on. Which of the following is a prediction? And the answer is, if I plug it in, then it will turn on. So remember, a prediction is an if-then statement that basically describes how you're going to test your hypothesis. And in this case, moving on to the next question, the hypothesis is the battery is dead, right? Because the hypothesis is a tentative answer to a question. So if it doesn't turn on, that's your observation. Then the question is, hey, why isn't my phone turning on? So then the hypothesis could be the battery is dead. And one way of testing that is plugging it up. Any questions about those two?
No.
All right. Which sequence shows the steps of the process of science in the order in which they should transpire? So basically, this is just asking you, the scientific method in the correct step order, and it is observation, question, hypothesis, prediction, and experiment. So there's not much else to say about that. It's just one of those things that you have to have it memorized.
You said hypothesis, prediction, and then experiment after the last three.
Yeah. So if you remember, like, again, the hypothesis is just a tentative answer to a question. So naturally, it has to come after the question. And a prediction describes how you're going to test your hypothesis, because remember, this is supposed to have multiple predictions for each hypothesis technically. So obviously, the prediction has to come after the hypothesis. And since the prediction is describing how you're going to test it, which is an experiment, then naturally the experiment would have to come after the prediction. Make sense? All right. Choose the most correct statement. Hypotheses are less comprehensive than theories. That's just simply the way your book worded it said the same thing in a different way. It said that theories are more comprehensive than hypotheses. So that's how it was worded in the study guide. I just flipped around the wording a little bit, but yeah, that is correct answer. Unfortunately, this one tricked most people. Hypotheses are educated guesses because everybody grew up hearing that. And that part's not necessarily incorrect, but the other part is where it says theories are tentative explanations, and that's not true. The word theory in science is basically like saying, all right, this is true. We know this to be true. Any questions about that one?
No, when I was taking that, I was like, oh, I think it's this one. But then I always heard like what you said earlier about it's an educated guess.
Right. Yep. That's what threw people off.
Mm-hmm.
And that question will probably be on the exam just for you and anybody watching this, because that's an important question. Anyway, what is the best definition of a hypothesis? It is a tentative answer to a question that can be tested and falsified. So, if someone says, hey, why was my tree knocked over last night? I woke up to it. It was knocked over. What happened? You could not say that Bigfoot did it, because yes, that is a tentative answer to a question, but we couldn't falsify that. Well, I don't have time to get into it. Anyway, yes, it's a tentative answer that can be tested and falsified. And let's at least look at the most wrong question. The wrong questions that were used most was what? A guess made in order to determine what observations and explorations are needed. That's wrong because remember, observation comes before hypothesis. And again, this is what threw people off. Educated guess is not the correct answer. Because again, sorry, really quickly, like I said in the lecture, way back when the semester started, like you could say, why did my tree fall down? My hypothesis can't be because God did it. That could be an educated guess, and it could be correct, but I can't test that. Therefore, it's not a hypothesis, and that's why an educated guess is an incorrect definition. Any questions about that? All right. What are you mostly made of? This is basically asking what are the big four, and they are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. And I think everybody did very well on that because after that annoying chemistry lab, I think everybody got very familiar with those four. All right. Basically, if an atom has what makes an atom have a positive charge is basically what this one is asking, and it's because it has fewer electrons than protons. Or in other words, it has more protons than electrons. That's what makes it positive. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. If you change the number of electrons, you get an ion. If you change the number of neutrons, you get an isotope. And if you change the number of protons, you just have a whole different element. And I guess there's not much else to say about that one. So any questions about that?
Nope.
Okay. What will you find in the nucleus of an atom? Simply protons and neutrons. That's it. Sadly, somebody chose DNA, which made me sad. But anyway, silicone's atomic mass is 28. Its atomic number is 14. How many neutrons are found in silicon atom? I don't expect anybody to know anything about silicon, however you want to pronounce it, but I did give you all the pertinent information. The atomic mass is made up of the protons and the neutrons. The atomic number is the number of protons. So 14 plus blank equals 28. And the answer is 14. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What is the bond between two ions? Simply an ionic bond. It's in the name. And also, anybody who guessed, well, no one did. Never mind. Not even worth mentioning. Okay. When atoms form molecules by sharing electrons, what kind of bond is it? And it is a covalent bond. It's all about sharing. To help you remember that, or anybody watching this video, if you cohabitate, that means you share a place with somebody, right? You live with somebody. If you're co-parenting, you are sharing the parenting duties. It's all about sharing. Co, in this context, should remind you that you're sharing. Neon has an atomic number of 10. How many covalent bonds can it form? And the answer is 0. Because
I had trouble with that one.
I can see why. Just remember, like, if it has a full outer ring, then it's not reactive. And the way you can figure that out is, right, we know it has an atomic number of 10, so it has 10 protons. Therefore, it must have 10 electrons because I didn't say anything about it being charged. So 2 on the inside. So then what? 8 more makes 10. So 8 on the outside. 8 is a full outer ring. That's why it is not reactive. So that's how you figure it out. But then again, in this case, you don't necessarily need to figure it out. Sadly, you could just memorize it because if it's on the exam, it'll be worded just that way. What holds the oxygen and hydrogen atoms together in a single water molecule? So if we're just talking about one water molecule, those are covalent bonds.
Mhm.
Now, if we're talking about multiple water molecules interacting with each other, that would be hydrogen bonds. And sadly, polar bonds and glue are things I just threw out there as junk. And anybody who guessed anything hydrogen or ionic got partial credit. If anybody guessed polar bonds, they got 0 credit because there's no such thing as polar bonds. Oh, here we go. This is what I was saying. Adjacent water molecules, so not a single water molecule, but water molecules next to each other. How do they interact? What kind of bonds are holding them together? And it's hydrogen bonds. So again, anybody who guessed hydrogen or covalent or ionic got partial credit. Well, nobody guessed ionic, but whoever it was that guessed polar bonds got 0 credit because that is not a thing. Any questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I'm only going quick because I know you have something to do, and probably anybody watching this doesn't want to spend a bunch of time doing this either. So anyway, why is water considered a polar molecule? It is because the oxygen end of the molecule has a slight negative charge, and the hydrogen end has a slight positive charge. And this is one of those trickier ones because the other ones are correct statements because the oxygen atom is found between two hydrogen atoms. That is a correct way of describing water. But come on, don't freeze up on me. Here we go. The oxygen atom. Anyway, so that's the most correct answer, but there are some other answers that are correct statements but don't really answer the question. Adjacent water molecules interact through. So this is basically like the question above where it says where the correct answer was hydrogen bonds. But now instead of the word hydrogen bonds, it sort of describes those hydrogen bonds, and it is the electrical attraction between the hydrogen of one molecule and the oxygen of the other. And looks like the only other incorrect answer that some people guessed was this one: sharing of electrons between the hydrogen of one molecule and the oxygen of another. And the reason that is incorrect is because if they were sharing those electrons, that would be a covalent bond, and therefore those wouldn't be separate water molecules. Those would just be one big molecule of something else because they would be sharing electrons. Any questions about that one?
Mm-mm.
All right. When an acid is added to a buffered solution, what will the buffer do? So remember, a buffer resists changes in pH, so it basically does the opposite of whatever's done to it. So if you add an acid, that thing's going to add H plus ions. Therefore, the buffer is going to accept those H plus ions. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Your cells are made up of water, but how much? This is just simply a number that you have to memorize. 70 to 95% is the correct answer. What happens when water freezes? Well, it becomes ice floats, right? It becomes less dense. So what makes something become less dense? It's when the molecules move farther apart. And another way of saying that is the molecules increase the distance between them. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And again, this is one of those partial credit ones. Anybody who didn't guess the molecules become more polar, well, never mind. I don't have time. That might not be true anyway. Anyway, a base increases the pH of a solution. That's all we can say about that. Remember, so it looks like the most common wrong answer was decreases, which is acids, right? Acids decrease.
Base.
Yeah, base goes up, acid goes down. Yeah, which brings us to the next question. An acid does what? It decreases the pH of a solution. So any questions?
No.
All right. Along those lines, if we're going from a pH of 4 to a pH of 7, so that's what, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's 3 higher, right? So because it's higher, we know that means it's less acidic or more basic, however you want to say it. So let's read what this says. 1,000 times lower H plus concentration, right? Which is another way of saying less acidic or more basic. And it's 1,000 because each step is times 10. So 4 to 5 would be 10. And then 5 to 6 would be 10 times 10, which is 100. And then 6 to 7 would be 100 times 10, which would be 1,000. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. What is the maximum number of bonds carbon can form? And the answer is simply 4. That's just one of those things that you had to memorize. I mean, I guess technically you could use what you learned and draw out the carbon molecules and figure it out. But yeah, generally I'm just expecting everybody to memorize that. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay, regarding monomers, carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides. Triglycerides are made up of glycerol and fatty acids, which technically aren't monomers, but that's okay. Nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides, and proteins are made up of amino acids. Yeah, that one was a little bit hard because all the options are pretty correct, sort of, kind of. Anyway, what name is given to this reaction? Something plus something gives us something plus water, and that's the key. It doesn't matter what it is. If you have water on the product side, on the right side of the equation, that means it's a dehydration reaction. You took water out of the reactants, and you produced water. That's why it's a dehydration reaction. Anybody who guessed hydrolysis got partial credit. Anybody who guessed polar or peptide, well, no one guessed peptide, but anybody who guessed polar got 0 credit. Any questions about this one?
No.
Okay. A protein's function is most dependent on what? And simply, it is just its shape. Its size doesn't matter. Its length doesn't matter. Its polarity doesn't matter. It's just the shape. Any questions about that one?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Which of the following is a polysaccharide? This is one of those you just had to memorize it, and the answer is cellulose. I'm glad to see that almost everybody got it, and the only wrong guess was sucrose, and at least sucrose is also a carbohydrate. So whoever guessed that at least got partial credit. Any questions about this one? That one?
No.
All right. This one's pretty straightforward too. Plants use starch to store energy, and they use cellulose as the main component of their cell walls. And animals use glycogen to store energy. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Not much else to say about that one. Do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Fats are blank, but carbohydrates are blank. Fats are hydrophobic. They're afraid, so to speak, of water. You cannot mix oil and water, and that's why. Carbohydrates are hydrophilic, which makes sense. Think about sugar. That's a carbohydrate. It will dissolve in water. So that's why those are the correct answer. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Go ask Mama. Sorry.
You're good.
What are saturated fats saturated with? Simply, they're just saturated with hydrogen. The opposite of that would be double bonds, sadly, because that's I guess was the most missed question. Because if it has double bonds, that means it doesn't have all the hydrogens it can, which would make it a non-saturated fat. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. By definition, what type of fatty acid has double bonds? Like I just said, if it had double bonds, that means it doesn't have all of its hydrogens, which makes it unsaturated. RNA and DNA are a lot alike, but they are different. How? RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. Of course, this was way back at the beginning of the semester. Hopefully by now, after we had chapter 10, no one would get this wrong. Anyway, let's move forward. You just got back from a vacation. You found some odd thing on the beach. Below is a list of characteristics that describe it, which is not an indication that it has. Okay, this one's not going to be on the exam.
Okay. Yeah, I had trouble with that one.
Yeah, it's just because obviously you would think if something moves, it is alive, and I could see there is an argument for that. But the actual correct answer, or that's why that is the correct answer, because just because something moves doesn't mean it's alive. But anyway, yeah, that's confusing, and I'm not going to have it on the final. What is a steroid? A steroid is a lipid. Not much else to say about that. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay, a blank is just a long string of monomers until it's folded into its correct shape, at which point it is a blank. A polypeptide, which is just a string of amino acids, if you remember, it's not a protein until it's folded into its correct shape.
Okay, I had that flip-flopped, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. And a lot of people did. Of course, anybody who gets this one, anybody who got it flip-flopped actually got partial credit for it. Anybody who guessed the other two got 0 credit. This is just going back, and this is a good time to remind you and everybody watching the video, the first assignment I gave this semester was to read the syllabus. So that's why I had that on there. Also, I guess I'll go ahead and say this now. It's too late now. But there's a sentence in the syllabus that says, if you found this, show it to me and you'll get extra credit. And the more people who find it, the fewer points it's worth. And I don't remember how many people found it. I'll find that out. I'll look at that into that later. But anyway, yes. Anyway, the entire course is worth 1,000 points. Independent work is worth 100 points by now. I'm sure everybody knows that, even if they didn't read the syllabus.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the extra credit thing was just a word that I said in the middle of one of the reviews. Let me stop and then open up exam 2.
From the exam 1, 2, and 3, the extra credits, would that be on the final or no? Would be a different extra credit word.
Yeah, not those extra credits.
Okay.
There'll be a new one. And the new one is going to be door handle.
Okay.
So let me yeah, hold on. Actually, I'm going to make a note of that myself. Otherwise, I'll forget. I'm also going to hide it somewhere as an Easter egg. See if someone can find it. Okay. Anyway, let me go back here and open up exam 2. And once again, I'll ask you just, do you want to do it the same way I just did where we addressed all the questions, or do you want me to just look at the ones you missed?
All, please.
Okay. Questions. Summary. Yeah, there we go. All right, let me share my screen again. And also, while I'm at it, I'll make sure we're still recording. Good. Okay. Here we go. Exam 2. Blank uses glucose and oxygen. Oh, that's basically enough. Yeah, blank uses glucose and oxygen, and the other one produces glucose and oxygen. So respiration uses glucose and oxygen. Photosynthesis produces it. So if you just remember, like when you breathe in, even though respiration is different than cellular respiration, but as far as this is concerned, it's the same. You breathe in because you need oxygen, and you breathe out because you're getting rid of carbon dioxide. So hopefully that'll help everybody remember. I'm sad that 4 people got it wrong. This one's a little bit trickier, sort of. In respiration, which produces ATP? They all do. So anybody who guessed, these people who guessed glycolysis and electron transport chain, they got partial credit. These people got partial credit. These people got partial credit. The only people who didn't get any credit were anybody who said glycolysis only or electron transport chain only. They all produce ATP. Granted, this brings us to the next question. It is the electron transport chain that produces the most ATP. But yeah, any questions about those two?
No.
All right. Which ones occur in the mitochondria? And it is a citric acid cycle and an electron transport chain. Anybody who guessed citric acid cycle only got partial credit. Anybody who guessed electron transport chain got partial credit. Anybody else got 0 credit. Just remember, glycolysis is the only one that happens outside of the mitochondria. Try to remember that pyruvate, as it leaves, it has to be groomed before it can go physically into the mitochondria and into the citric acid cycle. There we go. Which of the 3 directly uses oxygen? And that is whoa. Yeah, good grief. Yes, electron transport chain is the one that directly uses oxygen. That is where all those electrons finally end up, which should help you remember that. Remember, it is the oxygen that accepts that electron ultimately. And obviously, the electron transport chain is where all those electrons are going. So if you can remember those 2 things, you'll be good. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. Which one directly produces carbon dioxide? In this exam and in the final, any time that says anything about carbon dioxide, whether it's producing or using, it's going to be a cycle. Carbon dioxide cycle. Just remember those C's. So citric acid cycle is the answer to that one. Which one directly uses glucose? It's in the name. Glycolysis only. Glycolysis breaks it down to pyruvate, at which point it goes through some changes and enters the citric acid cycle, so on and so forth. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. Which one directly produces water? This kind of goes along with that question I asked up there, because once that oxygen accepts that electron, it becomes water. It's oversimplifying it, but as far as we're concerned, that is correct. And that all happens in the electron transport chain. Any questions about that?
Uh-uh.
All right. Which one or which ones are associated with acetic acid and acetyl-CoA? And like I said during lecture, I changed some names around. So anytime you hear the word acid, you should think of citric acid cycle, which is why I didn't call pyruvic acid, because that's in glycolysis. I call that pyruvate. So anytime you see anything about acid, then the answer is citric acid cycle. Anyway, anybody who guessed glycolysis and citric acid cycle got partial credit. Everybody else got 0. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Which one produces pyruvate? I've already said it unintentionally earlier, and it is glycolysis. Anybody who guessed, actually, it doesn't matter, the partial credit. There will be, like I mentioned earlier, there's probably not going to be partial credit on the final. So
Okay.
it'll be the same questions, but the wrong answer is the wrong answer. Which pumps hydrogen ions against a concentration gradient? And that is the electron transport chain. There's not much else to say about that. It's just something that needs to be memorized. Any questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay. I guess I could say this really quickly. To pump something against its concentration gradient is going to take energy, as you learned in chapter 5. That takes energy. So where are you going to get energy from? High energy electrons. So if you can remember you need electrons to do this, then you can remember it's the electron transport chain. Speaking of which, this goes right along with that, which uses hydrogen ions going down the concentration gradient to produce ATP. So we pumped them up in one part of the electron transport chain, and then the next part they get pumped, or they come back down. So electron transport chain. Any questions about that?
Nope.
All right. Which one uses ATP synthase? The only enzyme that I named in that lecture and that your book names for that chapter is, again, ATP synthase. And the only time we talked about that was the electron transport chain, which makes sense because I keep saying that, or I've said the electron transport chain is what makes the most ATP. It's all about the electron transport chain, which would make sense that would be the one enzyme that we name. Which strips away high energy electrons. That goes along with what I was just saying. Since it's all about the electron transport chain, that's what makes the most ATP, then the other two are basically there to support it. So it's the other two that strip away the high energy electrons. Sadly, more people got this wrong than they got it correct. Anyway, any questions about that one?
Mm-mm.
All right. In respiration, high energy electrons come from the glucose, and they are ultimately accepted by the oxygen, which then forms a molecule of water. So that is the correct answer. This is kind of hard to read. Yeah, there it is. Glucose, oxygen, water.
Okay. So that's the correct order.
Yep.
Yeah, with those ones where we had to fill in, I was having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, I could see how that would be. Just the format itself might be a little bit confusing. So the opposite is true in photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, the water is giving up the electrons. Well, look at this. This is even confusing. Look at it. The water is giving up the electrons. And when it does that, that forms a molecule of oxygen. And eventually, those electrons get all excited and put into a molecule of glucose. So I'm trying to see where that is written correctly. Where are you at? Water, oxygen. No. Maybe no one got it right. ATP. No. Water, oxygen. No. Water. No. I think no one got it correct. No, there it is. Someone got it correct. Water, oxygen, glucose. So just remember, photosynthesis is the opposite of respiration. That's another way to help you remember.
So this one is which one again? Photosynthesis?
Yeah, in photosynthesis, the water gives up the electrons, which then forms a molecule of oxygen. But those electrons that were given up get excited and eventually incorporated into a molecule of glucose.
Okay.
Sometimes cells undergo anaerobic respiration. This is called what? It is called fermentation. Well, there's not much else to say about that. That's just the answer. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. In anaerobic respiration, muscle cells produce what? Or muscle cells produce blank, while yeast cells can produce what? Muscle cells produce lactic acid. Yeast cells produce ethanol. Of course, yeast cells can do both, but the only thing they can produce in this, the only thing that can produce ethanol is the yeast cells. So that's why that's the correct answer. In cellular respiration, about how many ATP are produced? That's just one of those numbers you had to know, and the answer is 32. And at least the one person who missed it was at least close. So that makes me feel a little bit better.
Mhm.
In photosynthesis, which one uses ATP? And it's the Calvin cycle. So really quickly, before I go through all these, just remember, it's the Calvin cycle that's actually building the glucose molecule, which takes energy. So if you remember the light reactions, and of course, light, that's an energy, right? So it's in the name. Light reactions are all about harvesting the energy, and the Calvin cycle is all about using it. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and talk about these very quickly. So again, Calvin cycle is using the ATP. It needs energy to build that water molecule. Anybody who gets last, and again, I'll say this before I go forward, even though it doesn't matter for the final, but all the correct answers for the photosynthesis questions are either light reactions or Calvin cycle. All the other ones are just junk. And anybody who guessed those got 0 credit. Anybody who guessed one of those two at least got partial credit. All right. So speaking of which, if we know the Calvin cycle uses the light ATP, where does it come from? It comes from light reactions, which produces ATP, light reactions. Photosynthesis, which produces oxygen, light reactions. So remember, like we talked about earlier, the water gives up those electrons so they can be excited during the light reactions. And that's why, and remember, it's the water giving up the electrons that produces the oxygen. Speaking of which one uses water? Again, it is the light reactions because those electrons have to come from somewhere. They come from the water. Which produces high energy electrons. So again, we're talking about producing high energy electrons. So it's the light reactions. It's those photons and the light that excites those electrons. Conversely, if the light reactions are producing these high energy electrons, then it is the Calvin cycle that is using these high energy electrons. Because again, the Calvin cycle is like the sugar factory. It's the thing that's building that glucose molecule. They're gonna need some high energy electrons to put into that glucose molecule. And that's where they came from. I was hoping more people would get this one correct. Which one directly uses chlorophyll? It's light reactions. Remember, chlorophyll is a pigment. It's a green pigment. So if it's a pigment, it's all about the light. So light reactions. Sadly, someone guessed I'm not paying attention and I'm picking random choices. Obviously, they got 0 credit, while anybody else who guessed Calvin cycle got partial credit. Which produces glucose? The answer is Calvin cycle. And again, just remember, light reaction is all about harvesting the energy. Calvin cycle is all about using that energy to produce the glucose. Speaking of which, along the same lines, which one uses carbon dioxide? So remember, we're producing glucose, and glucose is just a bunch of carbons squished together. So we get that carbon from carbon dioxide. So it's the Calvin cycle that's using the carbon dioxide. And sadly, someone chose mitosis, where we haven't even discussed mitosis yet at that point. So yes, Calvin cycle is the correct answer. Blank happens in the chloroplast while blank happens in the mitochondria. I'm sad that people miss this. I said it a few times in lecture. I said someone's going to miss it, and it's going to make me sad. Photosynthesis happens in chloroplasts. Respiration happens in the mitochondria. Not much else to say about that. Sadly, again, 3 people chose mitosis and meiosis. I don't understand. We didn't. But anyway, any questions so far? I know I'm going quick, but that's because it's being recorded. All right. This exam essentially covers one property of life. It's energy, obviously. But that question won't be on the exam because when you think about it, the final exam is going to be everything. So that won't be an appropriate question. All life requires energy. On Earth, all that energy ultimately comes from which source? Ultimate being the key word there, and that is the sun. Looks like everybody got that correct. That's good. All life requires energy. Where do all the cells directly, or what do they directly use as a source of energy? And the answer is ATP.
Directly is ATP. Okay.
Just to make sure you're paying attention, not randomly choose the option, choose the word ATP. Hey, everybody got that right. That's good. Independent work is worth 100 points. Attendance is also worth how many? Entire course worth 1,000. I'm glad to see everybody got that. Here's where it gets a little bit trickier. There are 3 balloons. Each beaker has a solute concentration of 20. So or 3 beakers. So try to picture it in your mind. If you need to, make sure you have paper with you when you take the exam so you can draw this out. The numbers will be the same. You could technically memorize this, but again, all beakers have 20% solution. Beaker A's balloon has a 10% solution. So 10 is lower than 20.
Mm-hmm.
So beaker A, let's see. When comparing the beaker to the balloon. Okay, so if we're comparing the beaker to the balloon, 20 is higher than 10. Therefore, beaker A is hypertonic. Make sense?
Yeah.
Because 20 is higher than A. Okay, so beaker B is 20. So 20 and 20 are equal. So beaker B would be isotonic.
Isotonic.
And by process of elimination, beaker C has a 25% solute concentration, which is lower than the 20, or excuse me, higher than the 20%. Therefore, beaker C would be hypertonic. I'm probably not going to have those questions on there. I don't know yet. When you eat food that energy is put to work in your cells, which is another way of saying when you eat food, that energy is stored as ATP, really is what that's saying. However, not all of it is used for work. What happens to the rest? And the answer, it is released as heat. Anybody who guessed it is stored as ATP at least got partial credit, because again, that is what happens to some of it. That's what that first sentence is. When I say it's put to work in cells, that's what I mean. The rest of it is released as heat. Every time we convert energy from one form to another, some of it is lost as heat. And sadly, here we go again with the people with mitosis and meiosis. Not correct, not even part of this exam. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. This was just one of those we had to memorize the number. Looks like a majority of the people did. When you eat food, how much of that energy is put to work, i.e., how much of it is used to make ATP? And the answer is just 34%. Something that you needed to remember. Energy can't be created or destroyed. This concept is known as what? The answer is the conservation of energy. It's pretty simple. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Which light color is the worst for photosynthesis? Looks like most people got it. That's good. Green, right? Because green is the one color that you see when you look at a plant, meaning that is the one color that's being reflected back to you. It's not being absorbed. Therefore, it's obviously not good. The next answer is the opposite question, or the next question is the opposite. It's asking, what is the best color? This was a little bit trickier because blue is really high energy, so I think that's why a lot of people thought it was blue, but it's white. Remember, white is all the colors. So if you can remember that white is all the colors, obviously that would make sense that it would be the best.
White is the best. And green was the worst?
Yeah. And then that's it for exam 3.
I think I did the best on
exam 2. Sorry. On which one?
On exam 2. I did the best on exam 2.
Okay.
And I had trouble with exam 3.
Well, let's talk about exam 3 here. Let's see. Exam 3. And again, you want me to cover all the questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. Exam 3. All right. Almost there. Oh, man, this one's a little bit harder to look at. Wait. No, it's not. Okay. Let me share my screen here in a second. All right. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Let's see if I can make these quicker. We have a new species. A purebred one has blue eyes. It's crossed with another purebred that has yellow eyes. The eyes of the offspring are yellow. Simply, if that must mean that the yellow is dominant. And it looks like most people got that. Yes, yellow is dominant. Yeah, not much else to say about that. Same thing here, but we have red hair crossed with blue hair, and the offspring are purple. So remember, when you mix red and blue, you get purple. So if we're mixing phenotypes, that would be incomplete dominance. Sadly, more people got that wrong than got
Yeah, I
it
was
right.
confused with that one. I didn't know if it was the complete or and then an incomplete one.
Yeah, just remember when it's incomplete means you're mixing it,
Okay.
as opposed to having them both. Which brings us to the next question. We have blue lizard and a yellow lizard. The offspring are blue with yellow spots, so that means both the phenotypes of the parents are showing. They're not mixed; they're just both being shown. That's what makes it codominant.
Both is codominant.
And it looks like most people got that one. That's good. The law of segregation basically states what, and it's in the name, segregation. What are we segregating? We're segregating alleles or chromosomes. But only one allele for each given gene segregates into each gamete. So for every gene, I mean, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but for every gene in your genome, you have two alleles, right? You have one from your mom, one from your dad. And when you produce your eggs, and when I produce my sperm, only one of them, only one sperm is going to get one allele. It's either going to be from my mom or my dad, but it's not going to get both. So they are getting segregated during meiosis. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Having a chin dimple is dominant to not having a chin dimple. What genotypic ratio is expected when an individual without a chin dimple mates with an individual heterozygous? So this is where it would be helpful to have a scrap piece of paper with you. An individual heterozygous. So, big D, little d mixed with little d, right? Because if they don't have a chin dimple, they have to be homozygous recessive. So little d mixed with a big D, little d. And if you were to draw that out, you would see that that is just a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-2 ratio. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Mendel crossed purebred purple flower plants with purebred white flower plants, and all the resulting offspring produce purple flowers. The offspring are all heterozygous, and the allele for the purple flower is dominant. This is one of those questions that came directly from the study guide, and I didn't even rework it. But yeah, and again, if you had a scrap piece of paper and you had the time to do it, if you crossed a purebred, homozygous dominant and a homozygous recessive, you would see that all the offspring are heterozygous. And of course, if they're all purple, then purple must be dominant. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. The presence or absence of horns is a trait controlled by a single gene. What is the genotype? Oh, all that's just useless information.
Mm-hmm.
All this is asking is, what is the genotype of something that's heterozygous? That's it. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. So it's going to be big something, small something, right? Big S, little s. Big T, little t, big D, little d, whatever it is. If it's heterozygous, it's uppercase for one and lowercase for the other. Any questions about that one?
No.
Same here. All a bunch of superfluous information doesn't matter. This is just saying if somebody is heterozygous for a gene, which of these things describes them? And if you're heterozygous, that means you carry two copies, right? You have the of the same gene, same allele. I'm sorry, homozygous. Did I say heterozygous? Homozygous. If you're homozygous, you have two copies of the same allele. So big B, or little b, whatever the case may be. If you're homozygous, you have the same two. They're both the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. This question is basically just saying what combination
will produce only heterozygous offspring. But it doesn't matter if you're talking about dogs or cats or humans or watermelon plants, whatever it may be. What combination will produce only heterozygous offsprings? And the answer is a homozygous dominant and a homozygous recessive. Or in this case, big T crossed with the little t. And if you had a piece of paper and did all these Punnett squares, you would see that's the only one that gives you heterozygous offspring. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. What is the most commonly found in nature? And that's called the wild type. Looks like most people got that. That's good. The wild type is the most commonly found in nature. And of course, as predicted, the most missed question was dominant, or the most chosen wrong answer was dominant, which it makes sense. You would think that. But to help you remember that that's not it, think about freckles, right?
Mhm.
Most people don't have freckles, but freckles are a dominant trait. My man Abe Lincoln has Marfan syndrome. Here's the important part. It's the result of inheriting one messed up allele, but it has all these different problems, right? So it's one allele and multiple traits. And when that's the case, that's called pleiotropy.
Okay.
When you have one allele and multiple traits. This one's a little bit trickier. What is the key to recognizing a trait whose expression is determined by the effects of two or more genes, which is called polygenic inheritance? This is basically exactly what your study guide said, but instead of saying if you were to graph the phenotypes of a population, you would get a bell curve. Instead of using the term bell curve, they use the term a continuum. So it's the same thing. So if you just remember height, for example, is one trait, but there's a lot of genes that affect it. And if you were to graph everybody's height on Earth, there'd be a lot of little bars, right? Unlike with chin dimple. With chin dimple, there'd only be two bars. You either have the chin dimple or you don't. But in this case, you would have a lot of bars. And try to picture it in your head, it would be a bell curve, right? Because most people are average height. And there's very fewer people who are shorter and very fewer people who are taller. So that is polygenic inheritance. It would be on a bar graph. Any questions about that?
No.
All right, this one's a little bit more complicated. The ability to shoot spider webs from your wrist is inherited as a sex-linked recessive trait. So here we go. We know it's recessive. That means all of your alleles need to be that way to have it. The gene is found on the X chromosome. Can Spider-Man, a man who can do that, father a daughter who can also do that? So if Spider-Man can do that, that means we know his one X chromosome is recessive because he has the ability to shoot spider webs. So the question is, can he have a daughter who can also do that? So can he have a daughter who is homozygous recessive? Because she would have to have two recessive X chromosomes to do that. So you just look at all the different options and consider them. And then if the woman he mates with can also shoot webs, so if she was homozygous recessive, right, because she can shoot webs, then that means, yes, there would be a 100% chance that his daughter would do it too. I would go into it with some more, but it would just take forever. And it's the final, so you could just sadly memorize that answer.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If one strand of DNA double helix has the sequence TAA-GAC, blah, blah, you can see here, what is the sequence of the other strand? So see, here we go, the opposites, right? So ATT, CTG, TCA. And that's that right there. So that's the correct answer. Sadly, let's see, what do we have here? 2, 3, 4 people chose the ones with the U in it. And remember, if it has a U in it, that means it's RNA, not DNA. So that's why those are incorrect. Any questions about that one?
No.
So again, just to remind you, A goes with T and C goes with G.
Yep.
So this question's about RNA, specifically mRNA. There's a process it goes through, which is called splicing. In this process, things are taken out and things are left in, right? So what do we call the things that we take out when we do splicing? And the answer is introns.
Okay.
Which
I thought it was the exon one, but
yeah, it can be confusing. Just remember, because exon sounds almost like exit, like you get rid
Yeah.
of it. But remember, exons means that's the part that is expressed,
Okay.
and the introns are the junk in between. Now, they're not necessarily junk, but I'm for the purposes of remembering this for the final, you can just think of it that way. The introns are just the junk in between the parts that are expressed.
In between. Okay.
This question, I'm not going to waste time talking about it. It won't be on the exam.
Okay.
Transcribe this strand of DNA. So again, it's sort of like that last question about the DNA where you do the base pair, the complementary pair, but now we're talking transcribe. So that means the answer needs to be RNA. So we would do what? CCA GAA. Yep, this question won't be on there. There's a typo. So this
Okay.
is the correct answer, but sadly, on accident, I put TT right here when it should be UU.
Okay.
And I've
The
already
A, like with the A is the U.
right.
Okay.
But I made a mistake there, and actually everybody got these points, even the people who got it wrong, because it was a mistake. I'm going to write 3 questions. Skip to the last question. Okay. Where does transcription start? So transcription, not translation. Transcription starts at the promoter.
Okay.
That's simply what it is. Translation starts at the start codon. So whoever guessed that got partial credit. But yeah, transcription starts at the promoter. The absence of a terminator will do what? So we just need to think about, what does a terminator do? A terminator is where transcription stops. So if you don't have anything telling transcription to stop, then you have to think about, what does transcription do? Transcription makes a molecule of RNA. So if there's nothing to tell it to stop making a molecule of RNA, then the results will be a longer strand of RNA. Any questions about that?
No.
All right. You need amino acids to build proteins. How many do you need? And there are 20 amino acids. It's just one of those numbers I said you had to memorize. And there are 20 amino acids used to build proteins. I have 3 strands of RNA in my possession. Okay, so this is basically asking, you need to know the different types of RNA. And this one's asking about, say, number 3. So what kind of RNA carries the amino acid? I had to use the word carries because if I said transfers, that would give it away. tRNA carries or transfers the amino acids to the ribosome.
tRNA carries.
Yeah, just think carries and transfers in this context are the same thing. It's transferring something. It's carrying it. Try to imagine what a double helix of DNA looks like. There was a picture of it in the lecture. Anyway, what's keeping these strands together? It is hydrogen bonds. The weakest of the bonds is keeping those 2 strands together.
Okay.
All right. What happens in transcription? Put it in the reverse order. So good. Most people got it. I know that was a little bit tricky. I wasn't trying to trick the people or the students, but there are apps you can use to cheat. And I was trying to confuse the app, and good. It looks like it didn't confuse the people. But the answer is termination, elongation, initiation, because the correct order would be initiation, elongation, termination. And sadly, people were guessing things from the previous exam. It had nothing to do with hydrolysis, or actually hydrolysis isn't even a part of respiration. So that's kind of sad. But anyway, let's talk about transcription. Which of the following actually does transcription? Oh, excuse me. Which of the following does transcription? So remember, transcription is when we read the code of DNA to make a code to make RNA. Transcription makes RNA. So what makes RNA? What enzyme does it? It's called RNA polymerase.
Okay.
And it's in the name. So if you can just remember, transcription is how we make RNA, and then from there, it's in the name, RNA polymerase.
Okay.
All right. Which enzyme did we discuss being used during the S phase of interphase? So
This one had me confused.
I like this. Yeah, this is a good one because it requires you to remember two different things. First of all, S phase of interphase is when the DNA replication occurs, which is what S stands for. S stands for synthesis, DNA synthesis. So because of that, the answer is DNA polymerase.
DNA. Okay.
So again, remember in the cell cycle, before mitosis, your chromosomes have to be duplicated. You need to make more DNA. And if you can remember, that's where you make more DNA. Then it's in the name, DNA polymerase. What would a mutation that results in the insertion of a premature stop codon do? I'm not asking what it's called. I'm asking what it would do. So the first thing you need to know is what a stop codon does. And a stop codon is the thing that says stop translating. So then now that we know that, then you have to ask yourself, what does translation do? Translation is what builds the polypeptides. Translation is what makes the proteins, right? Translation is where we add those amino acids together, right? So that being said, what happens if you stop early? That would result in a shorter strand of amino acids. Makes sense?
I struggle with that one, but yeah, that makes sense now.
Okay. Sadly, someone chose this one, and I was hoping no one would guess this because I did say I'm asking what it would do, not what it's called. But anyway, which is in the correct order? Oh, I said this a few times in the lecture, and I said it would make me sad, and two people made me sad. We go from DNA to RNA to protein. I said, if you remember, forget everything else in this chapter. Remember that. Yeah, DNA to RNA to protein, which is important in everyday life because when people call the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, gene therapy, it's not gene therapy because it's just RNA, which goes to protein. It has nothing to do with your DNA. Anyway, any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Your cells have instructions on how to build proteins. Which processes are involved in building the proteins? This is almost asking the same thing that one asked, just in a different way. So we are going from DNA to RNA to protein, but when we go from DNA to RNA, that's called what? It's called transcription. And when we go from RNA to protein, that's called what? That's called translation. So that is why that is the correct answer.
It took me a few minutes to figure out which order it was in. I had to think before I pressed the right answer.
That's all right. Anybody who guessed translation and transcription, no one did. That's sad too. They would have gotten partial credit because at least those are the processes involved. That's just in the wrong order. Unlike the mitosis here, where 4 people chose mitosis answers, but I get it. You're in a rush. It's high pressure. Anyway, all right, this one's a little bit tougher. Your DNA has A's, T's, C's, and G's. If your genome is 30% G's, then what percent is made up of T's? So, all right, if your genome is 30% G, and G's go with C, right? So that means your genome is also 30% C, which means your genome is 60% G's and C's because you add it up.
Yeah. So
if your genome is 60% G's and C's, then it must be 40% A's and T's because 60 and 40 equal 100. So if it's 40% A's and T's and those are all equal, then you just cut that in half. Then it must be 20% T's. That's how you figure it out. But of course, again, this is the final exam. So that question is going to be written just like that. So sadly, you can just memorize the answer 20% if you want. Anyway, any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. Your cousin asked what glucose is from, what proteins are made of, and what DNA and RNA are made of. Okay, so yeah, this is basically just asking what are the monomers of DNA and RNA? It's really what that question is asking. And the answer is nucleotides.
Okay.
How long is a codon? It's 3. It's 3 bases. Okay. If you can remember, your book also mentioned the triplet code. Hopefully that'll help everybody remember. Triplet code. I'm glad nobody guessed the wrong. Sometimes, again, I just throw out random words and no one chose it. I'm happy. If you could see your DNA directly after S phase of interphase, you would find what? So this is that question on your study guide that said, basically,
a new strand, a new double helix of DNA is made up of what? Is basically what that question is asking about, right? So each new DNA double helix consists of one old strand and one new strand. There's not much else to say about that without going into a really long lecture. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. This next one's about mutations. Your mutation substituted an A for a C, but luckily for you, the codon still codes for the same amino acid. So yeah, you swapped out one of the letters, but the word is still calling for the same amino acid. Therefore, that is a silent mutation.
Okay, I had trouble with that one, so
That makes sense because if you try to figure out by what it's called, you miss sense, that kind of makes sense. Nonsense, that kind of makes sense. The only one that doesn't make much sense, in my opinion, is insertion. But anyway, yeah, silent. It's a silent mutation because even though you changed one of the letters, the overall product is still the same. You still have the same amino acid, therefore the same protein.
Okay.
Chapter 8, the first one covered in the exam, was about cellular reproduction. Sadly, we had 3 people guessing from exam 2, which is all about cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Of course, this question's not going to be, that question's not going to be on the final.
Okay.
Which of the following is in the correct chronological order? Prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. That's simply that. Now, we've never even talked about the Paleolithic era, Ice Age. That's one of those that I just threw out there, and a couple people got it or chose it. But yeah, prophase, anaphase, metaphase, telophase, or telophase, however you want to pronounce it. All right. So here's the next one. People did very well on this. I'm glad because I mentioned this in lecture. I said there's going to be a question where you have to guess, you have to say what the chromosomes did, and they're not going to be in order. And this is it. When the chromosomes separate, that's anaphase. When they're lined up in the middle, right, when they met in the middle, that's metaphase. When they get originally coil up, that's prophase. And when the nuclear envelope forms, that is telophase, among other things. So yeah, anaphase, metaphase, prophase, telophase. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Which of the following belongs to a normal human male? This question won't be on there either.
Okay.
I mean, I always do say for all my quizzes and or all my exams, whatever, you always need to choose the best answer. And the best answer is 23 pairs of chromosomes, which include an X and a Y chromosome. That is the best answer. However, technically, 44 autosomes is also correct. So I think those people got partial credit, but because of the ambiguity of that question, it will not be on the final exam.
Okay.
Regarding the cell cycle, only one of these things happens during interphase. Which one is it? And the chromosome duplication occurs. That's what we were talking about earlier. S phase of interphase is when those chromosomes duplicate. That's when we use that DNA polymerase. The mitotic spindle, that happens in prophase. So does them coiling up tightly. And sadly, this is one of those words I made up, preparatory phase. Anyway, any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. In anaphase 1 of meiosis, and basically we're comparing and contrasting anaphase 1 and anaphase of mitosis. So basically, in anaphase 1, we're dealing with homologous chromosomes.
Okay.
And in mitosis, we're dealing with sister chromatids.
I wasn't sure on that one, but okay, I get it now.
Okay. Genetic variation is accomplished by all of the following, or all but one of the following in prophase 2, right? So independent assortment, where your chromosomes, your mom and dad chromosomes line up any which way, that's independent assortment. When they get close to each other, they get swapped. So crossing over is when your mom chromosome will get a chunk of dad on it, and your dad chromosome will get a chunk of mom on it. Prophase 1 and meiosis 1, those are, again, everything that happens in the first phase of meiosis is all about genetic variation. So, yep, the answer here is prophase 2. So something you have to memorize.
Okay.
What in the world?
It's the
Oh, this-
note card one.
Yeah, this is the one that had a picture, and it said basically if a cell completed mitosis but not cytokinesis, right? So if it went through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase, but the cell itself didn't split into two, which is what cytokinesis is, then what would be the result? And there's a lot of ways you could describe it, but the correct answer here is it would have more genetic material than it started with. Because technically, think about it, at that point, you would have one cell with two nuclei. So that's why that is the correct answer. Any questions about that one?
No.
All right. Mitosis in humans, well, mitosis in anything, basically. Mitosis typically produces what? We'll stick with humans. Two genetically identical diploid cells.
Okay.
So that's like a three-part answer. First of all, you need to know that it produces two cells. Second of all, you need to know that they're genetically identical. And the third part is you need to know that they're diploid. So anybody who guessed wrong but got 2/3 of them correct got partial credit. Like this, two and diploid, so they got partial credit. Two identical, they got partial credit. But anyway, I guess that doesn't matter for the final. Meiosis in humans typically produces what? Simply put, it's just 4 cells.
Okay.
Now, of course, if I was going to follow along with the rest of these, it would be 4 genetically unique haploid cells. But yeah, the answer is 4 cells. Any questions about that one?
No.
Okay. A duplicated chromosome consists of 2 blank. And I thought I was hoping. Oh, yeah, good. That was an easy one. Everyone got it correct. Yay. Chromatids, 2 sister chromatids. I didn't want to throw in the word sister because that would really give it away. But yeah, 2 chromatids. Your brother asked, what do you call a chromosome that doesn't determine the sex of an individual? So not a sex chromosome, but an autosome. Chromatin is made of what? Chromatin is simply made up of DNA and protein.
Okay.
In the human life cycle, fertilization produces a diploid zygote because you bring in a haploid egg and a haploid sperm. You bring them together and you make a diploid zygote. Looks like most people got this wrong. Meiosis produces, they almost got it right because meiosis produces haploid sperm and eggs. So had that word been haploid, that would have been the correct answer.
Okay.
Homologous chromosomes carry genes controlling the same inherited characteristics. That's simply put, that's all that is. Any questions about that?
No.
And this one won't be on the exam either, but true or false, you can go back and correct mistakes, and the answer is true. And of course, the extra credit thing, and you and I have already talked about the extra credit thing. All right. So any questions about any of the 3 exams?
No.
All right. We did it. If you don't mind, if you could shoot me an email and remind me that we met. So that'll remind me to give you that boost to your grade.
Okay.
And it'll give us a paper trail too. So if I ever, for some reason, I don't give you the boost, you can say, hey, I sent you this email, fix it. All right.
After class tomorrow, are you able to meet again and go over the chapter 13, 19, and 20 study guides on which answers would be on the test and not?
Yes, I can definitely do that. The earlier the better too. You don't have to, but if you could do it at 9, that would be great because we have a meeting at 10. So if I could knock it out before 10, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll just be late to the meeting.
Yeah, I could definitely do that because I have a final at 10:30.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll either see you online or in the office at 9.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
You too.